So the topic of today's day-long session is the microbiota, influence of probiotics, prebiotics, and postbiotics on common health, immune system, and longevity. So we asked the question, what's the microbiome? It's interesting to realize that there are 10 times more bacteria in our bodies than there are human cells in our bodies. And not only is there 10 times more bacteria than human cells in our body, but the vast amount of the DNA in our bodies is the DNA of our bacteria. So here you see around the circle here with the different little green dots, we're showing that your probiotic bacteria really influence and regulate every single organ system in the body, especially the immune system and the brain. And now there are also scientific studies documenting and relating just about every single type of disease to the gut and the microbiome. So there's many things that influence and affect the microbiome. The way people are born, whether it was a cesarean section or a natural vaginal birth. Breastfeeding is very important. It was interesting when scientists found out that a great deal of the content in breast milk has no benefit to the mother or to the baby, but it's the primary food for the baby's microbiome. So breast milk contains compounds that are not digestible by the human, not digestible by the infant, but it becomes the food that nourishes the microbiome. The environment that an individual grows up in has an effect on the microbiome. There's a big difference between the microbiome that people develop when they grow up in the city versus the country, whether they have pets or not have pets. These are all things that influence the microbiome. And we really find that people that grow up in farms, for the most part, have a healthier immune system because they get exposed to more dirt. And so many people these days have a phobia about bacteria, and there's all these hand sanitizers and everything. There are no bad bacteria. There's only bad balance. And I'll talk about that more later on. So one of the primary functions of your microbiome is to regulate your immune system for your entire life. But what's especially important is that during the first 6 months of life, the number one job of your microbiome is to train the immune system for the entire life. So people don't get a good microbiome if they don't have a natural birth, and if they aren't breastfed, that has an effect on their immune system for their entire life. So diet is the most important thing affecting the microbiome. And I'll spend a lot of time later on today talking about how important diet is. It's certainly important to take probiotics, but you have to learn how to feed your probiotics well. And fiber-containing foods with the multicolored vegetables is the number one food for your probiotics. So 2 of the books I've written are on the topic of drug-induced nutrient depletions. Just about all drugs are depleting nutrients from people's bodies. And this is a very important topic, especially for physicians and pharmacists and other healthcare professionals, because they can counsel people about what nutrients are being depleted by the drugs they're taking. And so what happens many times is that people are taking a drug, and they may take it for an extended period of time before the nutrient depletions start to cause other health problems. And they don't connect the dots and make the connection that the drug they're taking is causing the nutrient depletion, which is causing another disease or another illness to develop. And so then they go back to the doctor and get another prescription for another drug, when they really need to know what nutrients to take. And let me just give one example of how these nutrient depletions can affect people. Let's use the example of birth control pills. So take the example of a woman who's been taking oral contraceptives for maybe 8 or 10 or 12 years, seemingly without any problems. But over the last 6 months or so, she's starting to complain to her husband or her significant other, "Oh, honey, I've got no energy. I can hardly get up and drag myself out of bed in the morning." Or, "By mid-afternoon, I can't even think about trying to make dinner for the kids and you and the kids when you get home from work." So this lady is probably not aware that oral contraceptives deplete vitamin B12, folic acid, coenzyme Q10, magnesium. All of these nutrients are critically involved in the generation of energy. And so they're gradually depleted over time, and she ends up, oh, I've got no energy, I can hardly move. And when I originally wrote the Drug-Induced Nutrient Depletion Handbook, I was astounded when I learned that oral contraceptives deplete more nutrients than any other class of commonly prescribed drugs. So it's no wonder women have more problems with sleep and more problems with depression. And I've seen this for years and years as I work in drugstores and dispense medications. And now there's an understanding of why women are more susceptible and develop some of these problems because of the oral contraceptives they're taking. Based on my drug-induced nutrient depletion work, I created a whole new category of drugs that I call microbiome disrupting drugs. And there's many drugs beyond antibiotics that upset the microbiome. So you can see the names of them there. Let me mention one other thing that's not on the previous slide that affects your microbiome. It's exercise. And I just wrote an article for our blog for my company, Essential Formulas. I'll get that to Margarita so she can distribute it to all of you. But I did a review of a number of different studies that have been published that's showing that exercise influences your microbiome. And I titled that blog piece, Your Microbiome and Your Bacteria Love Exercise. And the last bullet point on the previous slide was exposure to toxins. The environment is more toxic than it's ever been before in the history of mankind. For 99.99% of human evolution, people lived in a healthy, clean environment, and they didn't have to worry about what they were getting exposed to. But these days, you have to be proactive to lead a healthy lifestyle because there's so many toxins in so many places in the environment. So here we're talking about dysbiosis, and that's the term that it's just kind of an umbrella term that means you got some problems in the gastrointestinal tract that are creating symptoms like gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, pain, inflammation. So here you can see the difference. It's about a 85 to 90% good bacteria, 10 to 15% bad bacteria for a healthy microbiome. There's no study that really documents this, but that's what a lot of health professionals kind of estimate. We all have bad bacteria, or at least bad bacteria that can be bad if things get out of balance. But when you have predominantly good bacteria, the few bad bacteria aren't bad. They don't cause problems. So we all know that antibiotics are a major problem for your microbiome. But there's many diet and lifestyle things that also have a negative effect on your microbiome. And so high fat, high sugar, processed food, low fiber diets make a major problem for your good bacteria, and it actually promotes the growth of bad bacteria. So over here is a list of all of the things that can start to happen and develop when people consume the high-fat, low-fiber diets and high-sugar diets and so forth. So there's a lot of different health conditions that can start to develop, and people have different levels of immune system and different levels of weakness. So the same problems can create different types of illnesses and diseases in different people. So here we can see that the microbiome is affecting every single organ system in the body, especially the brain and the nervous system and the immune system. And again, we're showing that the microbiome here is affecting all of these different types of conditions. And really, the microbiome influences everything. So it's really the foundation of health, and we need to teach people that their microbiome is really the most precious possession. It might surprise you to realize there are some recent studies telling us that there are bacteria, there's a microbiome in breast tissue. And they're now starting to be able to diagnose risk factor for breast cancer based on the microbiome in the breast tissue. So here's our good friend, Dr.Ohhira. He was an amazing visionary scientist, and I'd like to spend a little time just reviewing his background and his history. So Dr. Ohhira had an initial career as a very successful landscape architect. And in 1976, he received an invitation from Malaysia to design a large freedom park in Kota Kinabalu, one of the largest cities in Malaysia. Dr. Ohhira accepted this job offer and did the design for this park in Malaysia. And there's a picture of the Freedom Park at the grand opening ceremonies. And in 1980, Dr. Ohhira went back to Kota Kinabalu in Malaysia to take part in the grand opening ceremonies for the Freedom Park, where he had done the architectural design. And so at the grand opening ceremonies, Dr. Ohhira ingested some bad food. He got violently ill. Fortunately, there happened to be a shaman attending the grand opening ceremonies. He saw Dr. Ohhira in great distress. He gave him something, a kind of a black syrupy pasty something that he swallowed, and Dr. Ohhira was amazed that within a couple hours he was totally cured, totally felt better. So Dr. Ohhira is a very curious individual. So he asked some questions about this miracle substance that made him feel better so quickly, and he took some samples of it back to Japan with him to study. He learned that this substance was made in Malaysia in a fermentation process with locally grown fruits and vegetables. So out of his curiosity, at age 49, architect Dr. Ohhira went back to school and enrolled in graduate school and got a PhD in microbiology. And that's how this whole process of the development of Dr. Ohhira's probiotics developed. It's always amazing to me how life brings synchronicities to us. If Dr. Ohhira hadn't been invited to design a large park in Malaysia, and if he hadn't gone to the grand opening ceremonies, and if he hadn't eaten bad food, and if there hadn't been a shaman there, we wouldn't be here. And so it was when Dr. Ohhira studied this substance that he was given by the shaman, and he learned that it was made in Malaysia in a fermentation process with locally grown fruits and vegetables, that's where he got the initial idea to use this fermentation process for the production of Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. And that's what makes us, or that's what makes Dr. Ohhira's probiotics so unique and so different than every other probiotic in the world. And that's what we need to learn about so that we can articulate how we're different and why we're different than everything else, so that people will know Dr. Ohhira's is the best. So fermentation's been used for thousands of years as a way to as a way to preserve foods. And the way the fermentation process works is that bacteria on the foods break down some of the foods and produce compounds called short-chain fatty acids, which create a slightly acidic acid-base balance, a slightly acidic pH, and that suppresses the growth of pathogens. So it's the bacteria fermenting the food that creates the environment that's unfavorable for pathogens. So fermentation can be used with many types of foods, and it's the short-chain fatty acid that predominantly suppress the growth of the bad bacteria. Your good bacteria grow in a slightly acidic environment. pH goes from 0 to 14. 7 is neutral. A healthy pH for your good bacteria is just slightly acidic, maybe 6.6, 6.8. Bad bacteria proliferate in an alkaline environment. So pH up around 7, 8, higher than 7, 8, 9, 10. And so creating a slightly acidic environment encourages the growth and proliferation of your good bacteria. So here's a list of some of the different types of foods that are fermented, and ingesting fermented foods is a very, very good thing to help to create and maintain a healthy microbiome, because you're ingesting a lot of really good probiotic bacteria. So this is a picture of the large fermentation vats in the biobank manufacturing facility. And one thing we emphasize now about Dr. Ohhira's probiotics: it's not primarily a probiotic. Dr. Ohhira's is primarily a fermented food product. All fermented foods contain probiotics. but that's what differentiates us. We're a fermented food product rather than a probiotic. I just want to emphasize this again because this is a very important point that we need to start to express and explain to people how this fermentation process is what sets us apart, and we want to begin to explain to people what this fermentation does so that they'll understand why Dr. Ohhira's probiotics is so unique and so different. So it's made with whole foods. I use the term organically grown foods. There are different standards in the United States for use the term organic or organically grown, but these are all healthfully raised, healthfully grown foods. No pesticides and insecticides, no artificial fertilizers, clean spring water. So that's one of the things. And then they're only picked at their peak of ripeness. And then these foods are shredded and added to the fermentation vats so that the bacteria will have their prebiotic food supply as their food source during the fermentation process. So this slide is kind of summarizing the whole fermentation production process, where we start out with the different types of foods and they are shredded and added to the fermentation vats, and then we add 12 strains of bacteria to start the process, and then the bacteria get to digest and ferment the food for 3 to 5 years before it's encapsulated. And so it goes through this process and comes out, and as the fermentation process progresses year after year, the color of the paste in the fermentation vats actually changes. The bacterial count goes down, but the concentration of the metabolites that the bacteria produce goes up. So these are representing the blue vats where the process goes through 3 years of fermentation, and then after the 3 years of fermentation, some of this material is taken and transferred to these large anaerobic fermentation vats for 2 more years of anaerobic fermentation. That's important because over 99% of your bacteria live in the large intestine and colon. They're anaerobic. So the additional 2 years of anaerobic fermentation allows the 5-year fermentation process to have higher levels of all the compounds that the bacteria produce under anaerobic conditions. And another thing that's interesting to me about Dr. Ohhira's visionary ideas, he realized that all living things respond to sound. And there are experiments where the same types of plants can be grown under the same types of conditions in 2 different rooms. In one room they play classical music, the other room they play hard rock, heavy metal rock music, and the plants growing in the room with the classical music grow much healthier and much faster. So consequently, Dr. Ohhira plays classical music in the production facility 24 hours a day so that the bacteria have wonderful, relaxing, soothing classical music to grow with. So I've actually written an article about this, and I'll forward that article to Margarita so you can all have a copy of it. But I document some of the studies that document the health benefits of classical music, and kind of tie that into Dr. Ohhira's idea of the Mozart effect for Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. So in this slide, I'm going to start to get into the real big important topic of today, which is postbiotic metabolites. This slide is summarizing the whole manufacturing process with Dr. Ohhira's 12 strains of bacteria, all the different types of organically grown foods that are the prebiotic foods for the bacteria, which allow the bacteria to digest the food and produce these postbiotic metabolites. Over the last year, I've been giving a lot of presentations at medical conferences and health conferences all around the United States. And the topic, the title of the talk that I developed is called Postbiotic Metabolites, the New Frontier in Microbiome Science. And it really is the new frontier. These postbiotic metabolites are an exciting new field in microbiome science that is really going to be changing everything. And you're on the front line with this because that's what makes Dr. Ohhira so unique and so different. So this summarizes again the Dr. Ohhira's manufacturing process, where we have the prebiotic foods that are provided to the probiotic bacteria that allows them to produce the postbiotic metabolites. And recent research just last year has reported that Dr. Ohhira's final product, after 3 to 5 years of fermentation, contains over 400 postbiotic metabolites. So I said earlier that Dr. Ohhira's is not primarily a probiotic. It's primarily a fermented food that delivers postbiotic metabolites. And that's really what Dr. Ohhira developed. His fermentation process is really a production process for the production of postbiotic metabolites. So the main thing that Dr. Ohhira's probiotics is doing is directly delivering postbiotic metabolites. It contains probiotic bacteria, but that's not the primary or the most important part of the product. Is these 400 postbiotic metabolites that really make the difference. So here's a list of the different strains of bacteria that are used to start the Dr. Ohhira's production process. And the definition of probiotics, where they're compounds or they're bacteria that have a beneficial effect on the host organism. And here's down in the corner some of the conditions or applications for Dr. Ohhira's in general, but basically for probiotics in general. They can influence things like irritable bowel and inflammatory bowel disease and diarrhea and different types of skin conditions, and just a wide range of things are related to probiotics. Also diseases in the mouth, the oral microbiome is also very important. So our primary goal is to help people attain and maintain good health. So beyond probiotics, we have to teach them about the prebiotic foods. These are the foods that are required for your probiotic bacteria. And it's basically the high fiber and non-digestible carbohydrates. And it's not enough just to take probiotics. If you don't learn how to feed your probiotics well, they will not thrive and survive. So in this slide, we're showing that your bacteria produce compounds like the short-chain fatty acids. That's just one of many, many different types of postbiotic metabolites. Another way to emphasize how important diet is if some high school kid who exists on fast foods and junk foods wants to spend money on probiotics, it's a waste of money. If that person is not eating a good fiber-rich diet, those probiotics that he or she takes are not going to thrive and survive. You have to be able to feed your probiotics well. So back to the postbiotics, the new frontier in microbiome science. This image here is showing that we provide the probiotic bacteria with prebiotic foods to produce ultimately the desired end product, which are the postbiotic metabolites. So I want to define our term here, the postbiotic metabolites. These are the compounds that your probiotic bacteria produce, and they are important health-regulating compounds for the entire body. To be a little bit more specific, the way your probiotic bacteria produce these compounds is they break down the fibers in the food and utilize their metabolic processes to create this wide range of compounds we're calling postbiotic metabolites. Indeed, the probiotic bacteria are amazing little chemical factories. They produce all your B vitamins and some of the amino acids. In a future slide, I'll have a whole list of some of the better known names of postbiotic metabolites that we know about so far. So one of the topics that I spend a lot of time emphasizing is that we have to enlarge our idea of the microbiome. Most people, when they talk about the microbiome, they think we're talking about the bacteria. I propose an enlarged definition of the microbiome. It's the bacteria and the compounds they produce, because these postbiotic metabolites are the major health-regulating compounds for your entire body. So that's the microbiome. It's the bacteria and all this range of compounds that they produce. So these are some of the better known classes of postbiotic metabolites: the short-chain fatty acids, acetate, propionate, and butyrate. all your B vitamins. In fact, we're now starting to realize that the B vitamins produced by your microbiome are probably a more significant source of these nutrients than the food that you eat. Another very important part of the nutrients that are produced by your microbiome are the amino acids. The 3 amino acids that are produced by your probiotic bacteria are tryptophan, phenylalanine, and tyrosine. And these 3 amino acids are the precursors for major neurotransmitters. So in addition to producing phenylalanine, tyrosine, and tryptophan, some of the bacteria also produce some of the major neurotransmitters, serotonin, norepinephrine, and dopamine. So these amino acids and these neurotransmitters are critically related to mental and emotional states. And if you're out of balance in these neurotransmitters, people have depression and anxiety and all sorts of mental emotional problems. Now we're starting to see a lot of this relates to the microbiome. So when people are depressed, psychiatrists give them things like Zoloft and Paxil and these serotonin reuptake inhibitors, these antidepressants, thinking that the problem's in the brain. Over 90% of the serotonin in your body is produced by your bacteria in your gastrointestinal tract. Over 50% of your dopamine is produced in the gastrointestinal tract. So you can see that if somebody takes an antibiotic and you wipe out your bacteria so that you're not getting these amino acids and these neurotransmitters produced, it's easy to start to develop some problems. Another big class of the postbiotic metabolites are the antimicrobial peptides, or AMPs. There are many of them. There are probably hundreds and hundreds of them. We haven't discovered them all yet. But some of the classes of them, they're called bacteriocins or defensins. And these are natural antibiotics produced by your probiotics. They selectively have activity against pathological bacteria, but they don't harm your good bacteria. So it turns out this is really an important part of your immune system. Your probiotic bacteria are producing natural antibiotics to suppress the growth of pathogens. And some of the probiotics are producing antioxidants. So some of the antioxidants are postbiotic metabolites. And some of your probiotic bacteria produce hydrogen peroxide, and hydrogen peroxide suppresses the growth of candida yeast and other types of yeasts. Now, earlier I made the statement that there are no bad bacteria. There's only bad balance. An example of that is H. pylori. Are most of you familiar with H. pylori? It's the bacteria in your stomach that causes ulcers in your stomach and in the intestines. And so over the last 20 years or so, doctors have gotten fanatical about testing for H. pylori, and if people have H. pylori, they give a whole range of 2 or 3 different antibiotics to try and wipe out H. pylori. So H. pylori is the most common cause of stomach cancer and small intestinal cancer. So doctors are thinking, we'll wipe out H. pylori and we'll protect people against stomach cancer. Well, now they're finding out when you wipe out H. pylori, there's a higher rate of esophageal cancer. So I go back to the point where there's no bad bacteria, there's just bad balance. And we're just so bacteriophobic about wanting to use these hand sanitizers and not be exposed to any bacteria. If you're healthy and have a good supply of all the good bacteria, the bad bacteria are not going to take over and cause problems. So I highly recommend this book, The Mind-Gut Connection, written by Dr. Emran Mayer. He's a highly respected scientist and researcher in the probiotic and microbiome industry, so to speak. And so in his book, Dr. Mayer tells us that your bacteria will use the information stored in their millions of genes to transform your food into hundreds of thousands of metabolites. So this is what I mean when I say postbiotic metabolites are the new frontier of microbiome science. Ultimately, we will learn that there are probably hundreds of thousands of these postbiotic metabolites. And these are the master health regulatory compounds in the body. They affect every single organ system, as I mentioned before, especially the immune system in your brain. So this is something we can emphasize about Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. When people have dysbiosis, when they have gastrointestinal problems, gas, bloating, diarrhea, pain, inflammation, the postbiotic metabolites are the things that will heal the gastrointestinal tract. So other companies give you a capsule with bacteria in it. Those bacteria haven't done any work yet. Dr. Ohhira's bacteria were working for 3 to 5 years to produce over 400 postbiotic metabolites. And when you deliver directly the postbiotic metabolites, you create change in the gastrointestinal tract very quickly. So I asked the question, why are bacteria important? And the answer is because of the work they do. And the work that they do is that they digest your food, and specifically the fibers in your food, to produce these health-regulating postbiotic metabolites. So when we use Dr. Ohhira's probiotics, I coined this phrase, rapid microbiome restoration, or rapid microbiome repair. That's what we get when we deliver a complete microbiome system that contains the probiotics, the prebiotic food supply that supports their growth and proliferation, but most importantly, we're delivering these postbiotic metabolites. So this is a list of the different postbiotic metabolites that have been discovered in Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. And notice that many of them are acids. There's organic acids, amino acids, nucleic acids, another class is fulvic acids. And these acidic compounds create the proper acid-base balance that's slightly acidic, that promotes the growth and proliferation of your good bacteria and suppresses the growth of pathogens. Good job there. In this slide, I'm talking about a very important class of postbiotic metabolites that have been discovered to be in Dr. Ohhira's probiotics, the fulvic acids. How many of you are familiar with fulvic acids? No life on Earth would exist without fulvic acids. And bacteria learned to create fulvic acids long before animals and mankind ever evolved on planet Earth. So fulvic acids are very tiny in size, they're nanoparticles. And yet one of the very unique features of fulvic acids is that they contain more binding sites per molecular size than any other compounds in all of nature. So Dr. Takahata announced that 6 to 8% of Dr. Ohhira's probiotics are fulvic acids. Because fulvic acids have so many binding sites, one molecule of fulvic acid can bind to 60 to 70 minerals. And because it's such a small size, the fulvic acid can transport those minerals easily across cellular membranes into the cell. So what we're learning about fulvic acids is that they are the major transport mechanisms for nutrients into your cells. So bacteria produce fulvic acids by breaking down organic matter in the soil. It turns out now that they also break down organic matter in your gastrointestinal tract to produce fulvic acids. So a major global health crisis is the widespread use of pesticides and insecticides and herbicides and fungicides that are killing off the microbiome in the soil, which means there are fewer bacteria and sometimes no bacteria left to break down the organic matter to produce the fulvic acids so that the plants aren't getting the nutrients they need. So I have dozens of studies in my databases that show that the nutritional content in the commercially available food supply has been going down, 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 down for about the last 80 years or so. So with the decline in the nutritional content of the commercially available food supply, people are becoming more and more malnourished. But with Dr. Ohhira's, we have this content of fulvic acids, which is helping us transport the nutrients into the cells in our body. So I think that the fulvic acids is excitingly one of the most important components in Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. So I really think there are only two types of people that should take Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. One type of people that should take it are people that have health problems who want to solve their health problems and get healthier. The other type of people that should take Dr. Ohhira's probiotics are people who are already healthy that want to stay healthy. So basically, I recommend Dr. Ohhira's for everybody. Oh, there was a couple of questions. Could I give some examples about how I use and Dr. Ohhira's in my practice? So one example, if I work with somebody that has Crohn's disease or colitis or irritable bowel syndrome, those people have serious problems, and it's really having a serious negative impact on their quality of life. They want fast results. So I have these people, or I suggest to these people, that they take 5 to 10 capsules of Dr. Ohhira's twice a day. And sometimes people will say, gee, that's kind of expensive. It's not nearly as expensive as getting 12 inches of your colon cut out. So when you take high dose of Dr. Ohhira's probiotics, you're powering in high doses of the postbiotic metabolites. So you're accelerating the healing process in the gastrointestinal tract, and I'll say more about that in more detail as we continue on. And if I counsel somebody that has eaten bad food and has food poisoning, I'll say take 5 or 10 capsules of Dr. Ohhira's, but if they had food poisoning, they bite the capsules and squeeze the contents out so the contents get directly into the stomach, because Dr. Ohhira's is in a patented capsule design that stays hard in the acid environment in the stomach and only releases the contents in the more alkaline pH in the small intestine. And an easier way to do that is to recommend the paste. Take it directly. This is what happened to Dr. Ohhira when he got violently sick in Malaysia. The shaman gave him this paste, got directly into his stomach, did battle against the pathogens, and cured him very quickly. So this is a very powerful product to have on hand. I would recommend a teaspoon or 2. You really don't have to worry about an overdose. You want to get it in on a regular basis. So if it's food poisoning, about every 15 or 20 minutes, take another dose until you start to get resolved. Another recommendation for the paste, every evening, take a little bit, about 1/4 of a teaspoon in your mouth, swish it around for about 30 seconds or so. It's very good to support the oral microbiome. For periodontal disease and things like that, very, very good. Another example, I used to be involved in CrossFit exercise. Do you know what CrossFit is? So one of my friends, an athlete in the CrossFit exercise class, had MRSA in the nostril of his nose, and his 9-month-old daughter had a big patch of MRSA on the back of her thigh. I gave them Dr. Ohhira's paste, said apply it constantly, every couple of hours, nose, back, totally cleared up in 1 week. So MRSA, methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus, one of the most serious antibiotic-resistant infections, a global health crisis. Dr. Ohhira's wipes out MRSA. We have cell culture studies showing that Dr. Ohhira's is effective against MRSA. So this is, in the United States, a non-prescription, over-the-counter probiotic, but it's one of the most strongest antibiotics in the world. So now I'm going to create a little analogy, or discuss an analogy, between 2 of the most important ecosystems in the world. One is the Amazon rainforest, and the other is your microbiome. So in my analogy, I'm going to start out talking about the inhabitants in the Amazon ecosystem, and then I'll shift over and talk about the inhabitants in your microbiome ecosystem. One thing that a lot of people don't realize is that the Amazon rainforest ecosystem, next slide, the Amazon ecosystem creates over 20% of the oxygen for our entire planet. Now, the point I emphasize here is that this ecosystem isn't just a local effect, it's a global effect. So in my analogy, this ecosystem is not just a local effect. It's a global effect. It influences and regulates your whole body. So now I'm going to take a quick little overview of the inhabitants in the Amazon ecosystem. You have millions of insects and thousands of species of birds and hundreds of species of mammals and hundreds of species of reptiles and thousands of species of trees and all the species of plants. And my question to you is, what happens when you destroy the ecosystem? If you have a destroyed ecosystem in here, it's not enough just to put the inhabitants back in. If you put the birds and the bees and the butterflies and the ants and the monkeys back into this damaged ecosystem, they're not going to thrive and survive. So the point I'm emphasizing is that we have to look beyond just the bacteria. We have to look at the whole ecosystem. So people, now I'm shifting back over from the Amazon ecosystem to the gastrointestinal ecosystem. People that have these types of problems with dysbiosis, it's more than just bad bacteria. These people have inflammation, intestinal permeability, allergies. So healing these problems in the gastrointestinal tract requires addressing the whole ecosystem, and that's what these postbiotic metabolites do. Some of you have probably had a patient or a client who is so uncomfortable with gastrointestinal problems, they say, "Oh, I feel like I'm tied in knots." And so all of these conditions, gas, bloating, diarrhea, constipation, here's somebody that is tied in knots. So these people are uncomfortable and they want fast results. And I firmly believe that Dr.Ohhira's probiotics is the fastest way to get these results, because you're not just giving bacteria, you're putting in this multitude of postbiotic metabolites, which are the master health regulatory compounds that will start to quickly convert all the problems in the GI tract back to a healthy condition. So Dr.Ohhira's will take somebody from this state, a highly inflamed gastrointestinal tract, back to a healthy state faster than every other probiotic compound product in the planet. Many of the postbiotic metabolites have anti-inflammatory activity. These people have a high level of inflammation. And in gastrointestinal dysbiosis, the acid-base balance is far too alkaline. You need to bring it back down to the slightly acidic level, which promotes the growth and proliferation of the friendly bacteria and inhibits the growth of pathogens. So Dr.Ohhira's contains organic acids, short-chain fatty acids, nucleic acids, fulvic acids. All of these acidic compounds help to bring the acid-base balance back down to the proper optimal acid level that is required for a healthy GI tract. So pH is measured on what's called a logarithmic scale. So every 1 point is a factor of 10. So 1, 2, 3, 10, 100, 1,000. The healthy pH over here is about 6.6 to 6.8. In dysbiosis, it can be 8, 9, 10, which is 10, 100, or even 1,000 times too alkaline. Really important to bring that back down to the healthy level of slightly acid pH. Another really important part of healing in the gastrointestinal tract is regrowth of healthy epithelial cells, the cells that line the GI tract. So many people don't realize that the epithelial cells that line the gastrointestinal tract, which is a lining that's only 1 cell thick, these cells that line the gastrointestinal tract have the highest rate of turnover of any cells in the body. You create an entirely new digestive tract every 6 to 10 days. It takes a lot of energy to continually renew these cells. And if a person has dysbiosis and a high level of inflammation, you need to regenerate healthy new cells as quickly as possible. So I mentioned it takes a lot of energy to continually renew these cells. You do not get that energy from your blood supply. That energy comes from the short-chain fatty acids that are produced by your probiotic bacteria. It's the postbiotic metabolites that are the energy to create and renew the healthy new cells. And the postbiotic metabolites will reestablish a healthy immune system and reestablish gut-brain communication. So gut-brain communication proceeds the majority of it along what's called the vagus nerve, the longest nerve in the body, going from your brainstem down into your gut. So it's really interesting to me is that about 10% of the signals that are traveling between the brain and the gut 10% are signals from the brain to the gut. 90% of the signals are going from the gut to the brain. This is controlling everything. So as you proceed to work with people, and gastrointestinal complaints are one of the most common types of complaints these days, explain to people about Dr. Ohhira's and say, please, just try it. When people try it, they get results. So here I'm going to talk about some of the different classes of postbiotic metabolites. Short-chain fatty acids are certainly one of the most important categories of postbiotic metabolites, but remember, they're just one category out of hundreds, thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands. So these short-chain fatty acids have anti-inflammatory activity, and we just saw a picture of the inflamed gastrointestinal tract. So these people need anti-inflammatory activity. So here's a couple of studies that are showing people that short-chain fatty acids have anti-inflammatory activity. This is regulation of inflammation by short-chain fatty acids. And the next study here, anti-inflammatory properties of short-chain fatty acids, acetate and propionate. And I mentioned before that it's really important to provide the energy to regrow the healthy new cells in the gastrointestinal tract. So it's the short-chain fatty acids, specifically butyrate, that's the primary energy source for the regrowth of these cells in the GI tract. And I've already mentioned how important it is to reestablish the healthy acid-base balance. So I'm just pointing out here some of the really important benefits of the short-chain fatty acids, which are one of the classes of postbiotic metabolites. And so short-chain fatty acids is one class of postbiotic metabolites. The antimicrobial peptides is another very important class. I mentioned that earlier. And the names of a couple of these classes of antimicrobial peptides, the bacteriocins and the defensins. And then down here, antioxidants was supposed to be a separate bullet point. That's just another class of the postbiotic metabolites. Many of them have antioxidant activity. And in that highly inflamed gastrointestinal tract, there's a lot of free radical activity going on. So these antioxidants are really important to minimize the amount of damage that's being done by the free radicals that are being produced. So now I want to shift gears a little bit and start to talk about some of the science that is developed that's starting to give us the scientific documentation and the scientific explanation of why and how Dr. Ohhira's probiotics are so unique and so effective. When they started to look at the genomes of both humans and bacteria, it created a very interesting situation that's called the genome complexity conundrum. Scientists discovered that humans have about 23,000 genes, which is far fewer than they expected to find. But the genome complexity conundrum, and a conundrum is like a puzzle, something that doesn't make sense or that we don't understand. So the genome complexity conundrum is that humans have 23,000 genes, but the common rice plant has 45,000 genes. So scientists are scratching their heads, saying, wow, if we are such evolved beings as we think we are, how can we only have half as many genes as the common rice plant? So the answer to the genome complexity conundrum is that over 99% of the DNA in your body is the DNA of your bacteria. We don't have to have so many genes because our bacteria are doing so much of the work for us. We have 100 trillion bacteria, and those bacteria have over 3.3 million genes compared to our 23,000. So I think and I hope that this gives us a better understanding of why it's so important to teach people how to create and maintain a healthy microbiome, because these bacteria literally are controlling everything. So a topic that's very important related to a healthy microbiome is balance. And I frequently talk against the case of high-dose probiotics. Many people have this mistaken belief that more is better. And I have people coming up to me saying, my probiotic has far more bacteria than Dr. Ohhira's, mine has 50 billion, or mine has 100 billion. So I emphasize balance is critical for a healthy microbiome. Taking high-dose probiotics where you have large numbers of just one or several strains is not working in favor of balance, it's working against balance. So we really are not so concerned about the bacteria count, this number of CFUs. It stands for colony-forming units, the number of viable bacteria. We're not so concerned about that in Dr.Ohhira's. We're not playing the numbers game. So I get back to emphasizing or re-emphasizing that Dr.Ohhira's is really not primarily a probiotic. It's a postbiotic metabolite delivery system. So high-dose probiotics can actually trigger an immune system alarm reaction. I use the example of immigration. In our country, we can handle a certain number of immigrants every year, and we do, and that's a good thing. But if all of a sudden we got 50 million or 100 million immigrants, everything would break down. The school system, the hospital system, the fire department, the grocery stores, we couldn't handle it. It's the same situation with probiotics. Balance is critical, and your immune system can go into an alarm reaction, even if you're taking high doses of a good strain of probiotic. You take massive amounts and it's throwing things out of balance. So I don't want to categorically say that high-dose probiotics are never warranted or never any good. Are you familiar with VSL probiotics? But on a long-term maintenance basis, I really think we need to emphasize balance rather than high doses of just one or several strains. And this statement is the conclusion of scientists who published an article in this particular journal, and they're saying probiotics can be ineffective or even detrimental if not used in the optimal dosage for the appropriate purposes. In addition to balance, diversity is another critical topic for a healthy microbiome. Scientists have analyzed the microbiomes of these primitive cultures, and they find out they have twice as much bacterial diversity compared to most Americans. I'm not sure how much similar it is to you people, but these people have never been exposed to antibiotics or cesarean births or pesticides and insecticides and all those things that disrupt the microbiome. So we need to ask the question, if microbiome diversity is important, how do we teach people how to get a very diverse microbiome? The number one factor in creating and maintaining a healthy microbiome, you must feed your probiotic bacteria well. An example is that you can have good seeds, but you throw them out in the desert and they don't get watered and they don't have good nutrients, they're not going to thrive and survive. That's the same situation in the microbiome. So how do we get a more diverse microbiome? Ingesting a wider diversity of fiber-rich foods will create the growth and proliferation of a wider range of probiotic bacteria, which will then produce a wider range of postbiotic metabolites. So Dr. Ohhira, in his visionary wisdom, 30 years ago, started to create a probiotic product that was not high dose. It's multi-strain at lower doses. And he also had the insight to use this fermentation process so that those bacteria were allowed to produce these postbiotic metabolites. So the bacteria that are growing in Dr. Ohhira's production fermentation process are probably getting a more diverse, fiber-rich diet than the diet that most people are feeding their microbiome in the diets that they consume. So I talk about the fiber gap. And I call a deficiency of fiber the number one nutritional deficiency in America. I don't know how that pertains here in your culture, but I'm sure that the primitive cultures that I showed in the previous slide are eating a far more diverse fiber-rich diet than even all of you. So these are some statistics from my country, but 90% of children and adults do not consume the recommended amount of fiber in their daily diets. And so fiber is critical for the health of your microbiome. Fiber diversity equals microbiome diversity equals a happy colon. Another thing I really want to emphasize about fiber, it's not just the quantity of fiber, it's the diversity of fiber. A lot of people say, well, I'm taking psyllium, or I take FOS, or some one or two types of fiber. To get a diverse microbiome, you have to consume a diverse range of fibers. Different types of fibers will promote the diversity and the growth of different types of bacteria, which will then give you a much wider diversity of postbiotic metabolites. So more about the fiber gap. Constipation, most common complaint in doctors' offices in America. Close to 30% of people regularly have constipation. And Hippocrates, centuries ago, said death begins in the colon. So here's a study with Dr. Ohhira's probiotics in college women who are constipated. So female college students with a history of constipation taking Dr. Ohhira's probiotics, and over here in the chart you can see subjects without constipation in blue, subjects with constipation, and you can see that the patients with constipation had tremendous improvements in the frequency of their defecation. If they have constipation, they don't have bowel movements frequently enough, and also the stool output and the quality of their stools also improved significantly. So in addition to improving the frequency of bowel movements and the quantity of bowel movements, Dr. Ohhira has also improved the smell and the shape and the color of the stools. But I want to emphasize that Dr. Ohhira's is what we call an adaptogen. An adaptogen is something that normalizes function. So Dr. Ohhira's probiotics is an adaptogen. If people have diarrhea, it'll help stop that. If they have constipation, it'll help improve that. So I emphasize how important it is to ingest a wide diversity of fiber-rich foods. And one of the best ways to ingest a diversity of fiber-rich foods is to have a good raw salad every day with lots of different types of vegetables. And one of my theories is that one of the reasons people don't eat salads often enough is because they're time-consuming. They take a fair amount of time to create. So once a week, I go to our organic health food store and I buy all of my different vegetables. And I process all my vegetables at one time. It takes about 30 minutes. So I put them all in a big bowl, and then the secret to the whole process is after you're done processing all your vegetables and chopping them up, squeeze a lemon into all the vegetables and toss it. The vitamin C in the lemons will preserve your salad buzz, and this will store safely in your refrigerator in a container for up to a week. So the lettuce mix that I have, that I purchased from the health food store, has 4 different types of lettuce in it. And then I get all of these different types of vegetables. So I have 16 different types of fiber-rich foods in my salad. So I said I did this to help people save time making salads. So just to review here, rapid microbiome restoration. We get fast results providing or giving people Dr. Ohhira's probiotics. So Dr. Ohhira's is really a complete microbiome system, the probiotics, the prebiotics, and the postbiotic metabolites. And one thing I like to emphasize about Dr. Ohhira's production process is that this process over here created by Dr. Ohhira simulates nature. In your human gastrointestinal system, you have bacteria down here. You put in food, the bacteria digest and ferment the food and produce all these postbiotic metabolites. So Dr. Ohhira, in his visionary wisdom, created an external system and an external process that simulates nature. Here we give the bacteria foods and give them 3 to 5 years to digest and ferment the food and produce these postbiotic metabolites, but we emphasize this is a system that mimics and simulates nature. So it's important to realize that the capsule in Dr. Ohhira's probiotics is a patented capsule delivery. It stays hard in the harsh environment, the harsh acidic environment in the stomach, and then it preferentially releases the contents in the more alkaline pH of the small intestine. And another important part about Dr. Ohhira's probiotics is that it does not require refrigeration. Dr. Ohhira's probiotics learn to thrive and survive for 3 to 5 years at room temperature during the fermentation process. So that's why they don't need refrigeration. They've learned to thrive and survive at room temperature. So this makes Dr.Ohhira's a very user-friendly product. You don't have to worry about meals or empty stomach can be taken any time because it's going to go through the stomach and release the contents in the small intestine. So patented capsule delivery and not requiring refrigeration makes it very user-friendly. The recommended dose for Dr.Ohhira is 2 capsules daily. And I'm often asked, how young can people take Dr.Ohhira's probiotics? About 1 day. 1 day old. Obviously, I'm not recommending that a 1-day-old child swallow a capsule, but when a lady gives birth via a C-section delivery, that child's not getting exposed to the mother's vaginal microbiome. So for those parents who give birth to a child with a C-section, I recommend that they bite Dr.Ohhira's capsule or take some of the paste, put it on their finger, rub it around in the inside of the infant's mouth so that infant starts to get good bacteria to build a healthy microbiome, to start to build a healthy immune system. So this again is a wonderful application of the paste, Dr.Ohhira's paste, to be able to just put a little on your finger and put it in the infant's mouth. Now I'm going to go over and review some clinical trials that have been conducted on Dr.Ohhira's probiotics. Just about everybody I know would like to have more energy. So here's a test that was done in Japan with mice. It's called the forced swimming test to exhaustion. They get a group of mice and divide them into 2 groups. One group is getting Dr.Ohhira's for 3 weeks. The other group is getting saline solution for 3 weeks. The mice getting Dr.Ohhira's for 3 weeks swim 2 times longer before exhaustion. And people used to complain about the poor mice, so I make sure to tell them that we humanely rescue the mice, we don't let them drown. Just think about this for a moment. Dr.Ohhira's probiotics, the mice are able to swim 2 times longer before exhaustion. That's really quite significant. And here's a study on bone density. So 157 men and women, and measured the density of their bones in 2 different places. So they're taking from 3 to 10 capsules per day of Dr.Ohhira's for up to 24 months. So why the difference between 3 capsules to 10 capsules? The dosage was based on body weight. So people that were very small took lower doses and big heavy people took larger doses. And I want to emphasize, as I talk about the results of this outcome in this trial, we're not talking about treating osteoporosis because we can't talk, at least in our country, about treating disease. We're just talking about improving bone health. So here's the results. Men, 22% increase in bone mineral content and 18% increase in bone density. And the women, 32% increase in bone mineral content and 12% increase in bone density. So the question is, how could Dr.Ohhira probiotics be responsible for having this kind of positive effect on bone density? We don't know for sure, but I have a theory. The Dr.Ohhira's probiotics is putting in short-chain fatty acids. The short-chain fatty acids create the slightly acidic condition in the GI tract that optimizes the uptake of minerals from the GI tract. So you need to have a slightly acidic condition in the GI tract in order to absorb your divalent minerals like calcium and magnesium, but also iron and many of the other minerals. So in addition to increasing the absorption of calcium and magnesium, which are critical for bone growth, your probiotics are also chemical manufacturing plants. They're creating some of the B vitamins that are very critical for bone metabolism, and also vitamin K, which is critical for bone growth and bone health. How many of you are familiar with Clostridium difficile? Clostridium difficile is, everybody has Clostridium difficile. We all have it. But now we have antibiotic-resistant Clostridium difficile. It's called C. diff. And C. diff is, antibiotic C. diff is a member of these antibiotic-resistant superbugs like MRSA. So in the United States now, more people are dying from Clostridium difficile infections than HIV and AIDS. This particular study is using a study design that's very commonly used in the pharmaceutical industry. So in the Petri dish here, they have Clostridium difficile, and there's a blank area in the center that they call the well. So when they put Dr. Ohhira's probiotics in the well, you can see there's an area here where the Clostridium difficile is no longer growing. So showing that when the Clostridium difficile comes into contact with Dr. Ohhira's kills it or impedes its growth. And people that are infected with Clostridium difficile, they'll have horrible diarrhea 5, 6, 8, 10, 12 times a day. Have them start taking high-dose Dr. Ohhira's, like 10 capsules twice a day, to try and get that under control. Here's a study with Dr. Ohhira's against Candida, which is a yeast infection, and the Candida yeast produces toxins for the system that get absorbed systemically and create all sorts of problems, including mental emotional problems when those toxins get across the blood-brain barrier into the brain. And you can read the effects here where using Dr. Ohhira's created an improvement in all sorts of different conditions here, diarrhea, and reduced the number of candida in both the feces and the stomach. And so effectively, Dr. Ohhira's is an effective treatment against candida. So here's a human clinical trial with male athletes who are on a university track team. So this is a human clinical trial. We're going one step beyond the mouse swimming study into showing that there's significant benefits with Dr. Ohhira's in male athletes. So we have 6 male long-distance runners on a university track team. They did a number of blood tests after an intense run, and then they started taking Dr. Ohhira's for 3 weeks, and then they did another intense run and did all the blood tests and compared the results. So here are the results. 8.4% increase in hemoglobin. Now, if you know anything about the world of competitive athletes, to gain a little increase in hemoglobin is a big deal. In the world of professional sports, illegal doping is something that's frowned upon, but the reason athletes are doing illegal doping, using illegal drugs, is to boost their hemoglobin level. So Dr. Ohhira's is really a legal form of boosting hemoglobin levels. Because hemoglobin is what delivers oxygen to your cells and tissues. So if you have more hemoglobin, you get more oxygen, you get more power, more energy. Some of the other benefits here, an increase in VO2 max, which means they can process more oxygen, and an increase in their anaerobic threshold, which means they can clear lactic acid more quickly. When you exercise intensely, your muscles start to ache. That's because lactic acid builds up in the muscles. So if you can clear lactic acid more quickly, you have the ability to exercise intensely for a longer period of time. Also an increase in cardiac output. So I think many athletes pay attention to their diet to some degree, but they probably don't understand how intimately important the microbiome is in terms of digesting the food, breaking the food down, and making the nutrients absorbable into the system, and delivering also oxygen and energy to the cells. And so I think we can start to recommend Dr. Ohhira's probiotics to competitive athletes to help them get a little boost. So again, I emphasize the difference between Dr. Ohhira's probiotics, the 3 to 5 years of producing postbiotic metabolites, compared to other companies that give you a capsule with bacteria in it. I call it a starter culture. These bacteria haven't done any work yet. We're directly delivering the postbiotic metabolites. On this slide, I'm going to show you and kind of emphasize the difference between Dr. Ohhira's and all other probiotics, and explain and with a little bit more insight into why Dr. Ohhira's is so fast and so efficient and so effective at creating change in the microbiome. So at Dr. Ohhira's, we're directly delivering the postbiotic metabolites, which immediately start to transform the gastrointestinal system and create going from inflammation and bad bacteria back to the healthy GI condition. So other companies are just giving you bacteria in a capsule. First, those bacteria have to survive the transit through the very harsh acid environment in the stomach. And if they survive and get through the stomach into the small intestine, then they have to start to find the fiber-rich foods that they require in order to produce the postbiotic metabolites. And if the person's sick and doesn't feel good, they probably haven't been eating well for a couple of days. and so they haven't been taking in lots of raw vegetables and fruits and so forth, so they haven't been putting these fiber-rich foods into their digestive tract. So the bacteria arrive there, but they can't find the types of foods they need. And they have to fight a lot of bad bacteria, and they're entering in a very inflamed environment. The acid-base level is probably anywhere from 10 to 100 times too alkaline. So if they survive, and if they find the friendly fiber foods that they need, then they have to start to break down those foods and incorporate them into their system and use their metabolic machinery to start to produce the postbiotic metabolites. This takes time. Dr. Ohhira's probiotics here immediately starts to transform the microbiome ecosystem. One of the most serious global health challenges is the rapid rise in antibiotic-resistant bacteria. Some people in the scientific literature are talking about the post-antibiotic era. And the post-antibiotic era means we may be entering into a time when antibiotics are no longer effective. We need more bugs, not more drugs. So this is just a summary slide, again saying that Dr. Ohhira's probiotics, the 3-year and the 5-year system, rapid microbiome restoration, because we're delivering a complete microbiome system. And if people go to a drugstore or a mass market store and spend $9.95 for a bottle of probiotics, they're getting what they pay for, a cheap probiotic. And yes, Dr. Ohhira's is more expensive than many of the other probiotics on the market, but as you can see, it's a time-intensive and labor-intensive process for 3 to 5 years to produce Dr. Ohhira's. So thank you very much. I'm now happy to answer questions for as long as you have questions.